Austin, my man, what's going on? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Not much.
Yeah, we were just chatting off air. So you said you got off to the day to a little bit of a late start. So cool. This will hopefully be a good transition into your most productive hours of the day. Pete, I'm going to give you the mic in a sec to give a little intro for you, but I like to give a little intro. People know me. They're listening to the podcast, and they might be wondering why would I choose you to have you on the podcast? And frankly, it's not complicated. Most books on health and nutrition and anatomy and physiology and biomechanics, and maybe I stretched a little bit far there, but let's stick with like training and nutrition in particular. Most books, hardcover, in person, like hold it in your hands, books just suck balls. Like they're just not good. And there's the occasional good one. And you wrote a really, really good one. And when it comes to like, anatomy and biomechanics are all the rage right now. We're going to talk about your background. But your book, Science of Strength Training, is just like a fantastic resource for first of all, for everybody. But I also think that there is a specific individual who wants to have that kind of like in their hands copy, something solid, not necessarily like, oh, I can go do like the N1 courses, or I can do this person's online course. Like there is something to be said about having a hard copy, so to speak. And you've written an amazing book that I think I hope people know about it, and I'll put it in the show notes and all that stuff. I have it on my bookshelf right here. But why don't you introduce yourself, tell people who you are, what you do, how you became so passionate about all this stuff, and then we can talk a little bit about the origin of the book. I do want to start with that, but I want to move on with that because you are more than just that book.
Yeah, I've certainly, the book has been a big part of my career over the past few years since I published in 2021. So that certainly is a big part of my career and a big part of the transition I've kind of found myself in from a career standpoint. So my name's Austin. I'm a personal trainer, by trade. We all have different names for ourselves, but, when people ask, what do you do? My answer is always personal trainer. My wife kind of gets on me for certain things because she's like, well, you wrote a book. Well, you've done this. Well, you've done this. And it's like, look, I'm a person that helps other people train personally. Right. So I'm a personal trainer and I'm good with that. I don't need that to say anything else. So by trade, I'm a personal trainer. I've been doing that for since 2013, so pretty much right at a decade now. And a lot of my time's been spent online. And I started out in person, transitioned to online early in the game. Back in late 2014, early 2015 was when I got started in the online space, which is around the similar time to when I was going through university, studying exercise science and sports nutrition. And then I got into competing in physique bodybuilding. I had a professional career in that. So I thankfully had early success, or else I don't think I would have stuck with it. So I started competing when I was 19. I ended up turning pro in the IFBB naturally when I was 20. I competed till I was 24. And then I ended up getting married, transition. I graduated university, got married, and moved to Australia, all within like a 2 to 3 week time frame. And so that was like, oh, this is the end for that. I'm done with that now. This is the next chapter of my life will begin. That was kind of like a hard stop for me. And so that was sort of an easier transition. I think a lot of people kind of struggle with that. When is the end for me from a competing standpoint? And for me, it was very clear of like, oh, this is the end. And so all that happened in a very short amount of time. The timestamp that's around 2017, January of 2017. So that's kind of that journey. I got into lifting weights when I was, let's say 12 years old. I always kind of forget if it's 11 or 12, but it doesn't matter. I was very young. My brother got me into it, and I've been very fortunate to have very qualified individuals in my life, throughout my life, that have taught me how to do it properly and how to integrate it well within my life. And, for a lot of us, that's a ongoing struggle. And so that's been a big part of my career transition is kind of how to help people integrate strength training and exercise and physical activity into their life and really kind of be rooted in strength training, because we have research to support this statement, but it is kind of the best bang for your buck in terms of time spent doing a thing that is the greatest impact on our health and lifespan and health span. So that's kind of my initial, here I am, this is who I am intro. And we'll kind of, break that apart as we go here.
Cool. Let me just poke around at the moving to Australia and stopping physique competition. Was there a part of you that wanted to stop anyway, or was it just like you moved there? And I mean, listen, let's be real. People in Australia are it's one of the most fitness heavy places. It's certainly at least from what it feels like on this end, on the computer side of things, on the internet, definitely Australia isn't a place where it's like, oh yeah, people don't do fitness here, and I'm an oddball competing. And so was it a part of you that already wanted to do that, and you're like, hey, here's a good opportunity to turn a page in my metaphorical chapter of this book here, or did you kind of feel like you were at the end of your rope with competing already?
Yeah, I was finding my way out. I certainly was falling out of love with something that I was deeply in love with at one point, and I think that's a struggle we all carry, and our attachments to things that we love, activities and pursuits and hobbies. And bodybuilding came into my life at a time where I really needed it, and I really leaned on it, and it really helped me become who I am. So I always kind of have a debt to that, and will always push that forward. But I think for all of us, there is a time where it's the end, and it needs to be the end. And it no longer integrated as well with my life. And that was a big part of that transition. So I met my wife when I was in England. She's from Kentucky. I'm from Southern Indiana. We grew up 30 miles apart, but we actually met while we were both in England. And that's a story for, that's a different long story. But within that time frame, I had taken kind of a hiatus from really my life. And I was like, I just want to do something else. I was sort of running away from my life. That was in 2015. And our life that I had kind of created or found myself living. And I needed a transition. And so I was trying to find the most productive way to run away, and studying abroad in England, I still get school credit. I still get to push towards graduating somewhat on time, even though it kind of pushed me back a semester, which is fine. That was going to happen regardless. And so I went to experience that. I met my wife there. And during the hiatus, I really kind of stopped training for the most part, as much as I was, training. I was training 6 days a week, sometimes twice a day. And that was my life. That was really what it was centered around. Every day I woke up, it was like, well, there's a morning workout, there's an evening workout, or an afternoon workout. And there's the work that I have to do in between. And that was my everyday. And that was my life for a long time, a stint there in my 20s. And so from there, when I got back from England, my wife and I, who's now my wife, we were just dating at the time and thinking about getting engaged. I really hadn't shown her that side of me, and I was a professional at something, and she hadn't seen me be a professional at the thing I was a professional at. And so for me, that was like, oh, well, I want to at least experience this with you once, because I do this thing at a very high level. And so, when we met, we were just traveling around, living in, very normal. I was studying. I may have lifted twice a week at the time. And she understood kind of oh, you compete. I knew some competitors and powerlifters back in the day. I kind of know generally what that is. And I was like, yeah, you probably don't. So I'd love for you to experience
me when I'm cranky, and me when I'm starving.
Well,
yeah. Well,
yeah. Thankfully, my last professional show really was my best one. It was the best I ever felt. It was the most fulfilled I had ever felt during, I think, is because I had better relationships with it. I had deeper relationships with other people during it. And I didn't allow it to completely take over my life. I allowed it to just better complement my life. Obviously, at that level, you have to dedicate your life to it. But again, more complementative. And it was a deeper prep, if you will, in terms of just overall meaning and fulfillment. And, it was ultimately the best I ever looked at a show and peaking and everything else. And I went into it knowing it was my last one. And that was big, so I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to come next after I got back from England. But when I came back, in a relationship, it was like, oh, I do want to do one last one. And I want you to experience this, what's been such a big part of my life up to this point. And so that was kind of the end for me, if that makes sense. And I just wanted to know it was my last one because I needed closure in that, I think. And that helped me kind of close that chapter and tie it up and kind of leave it in the archives better than I think a lot of people leave it.
Yep, that is fair. Yeah, the exit process of competing to me is just like an interesting thing because I feel like it is associated with some not. I mean, addictive is just like something a word we throw around, but I feel like it could be something that's like most people are either going to have a most people are going to have a bad experience and then be done with it, or yeah, just keep getting addicted to wanting to do more. And I don't just mean addicted in such a net negative way. I mean, it could be like addicted to just doing something that you find fulfilling and it feels good and you like doing it and you have a community and all that good stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. It's not the typical, like, you know, I had my fiance or wife at the time and I just wanted to go out with a bang and experience that with her and then move on with my life. And that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I know, it's great. And I think obsessive probably is a better word than addicted. Yeah. I think to be good at something, to be good at really anything to the highest degree you can be, you have to have somewhat obsessive behaviors towards it. I think we all find that within our business life or what have you, whatever skills we're trying to obtain, we become rather obsessive towards those things. And for me, it was an obsessive behavior that at one time really benefited my life in many ways. It really gave me a lot of meaning and it gave me a positive trajectory at a time in my life when I didn't think there was one. And when I had a better understanding of a better out and a better trajectory for my life, that was the end of that leaning on that obsessive behavior. And I no longer felt like I needed it as much, which obviously comes with its transitions, right? And I'm still trying, even to this day, I'm still, as we all do, we're all still trying to find what is the thing for me. What do I actually enjoy? And what is a good mix for me in terms of the way I approach my health and wellness and fitness life. And, that's just a part of aging and a part of going through this experience that we get to have on this planet. But it was an end to an obsessive stint that I'm happy ended, but I'm also really grateful that it existed.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Happy for you. Happy was a good experience, and the exit process was a good experience as well. I want to transition talking about the book, but as I was thinking about like, hey, let's, maybe we want to talk about the book, but I was like, does he get bored talking about the book? Like I have somebody come on the podcast, a book. It's like, it's not like you wrote the book yesterday. It's not like we're like doing like a book launch. Like you get bored talking about it. I really want to talk about it because I think, I just think it's very rare that I advocate books and like it's just not the medium normally that for like very up to date, like quality, very applicable knowledge. And yours is like one of the few in our space that I'm like, yeah, it's actually a good book. You should go read it. You ever get bored talking about it?
Thank you first for the kind words. Not really. I think at a social level when I'm out, at a friend's gathering, it's like, yeah, I don't really want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But from a professional sense, no, I really don't, because, a lot of the meaning behind the book and all of the work that went into the 18-month process of writing it and getting it published and everything else, or getting it, going to print, getting it out into the world, was really painstaking, and there's a lot that went into it. But it is such a affordable resource for people to really have to better understand strength training. And for me, in this new kind of next chapter of my career, it's been, how do I reduce the friction for people, or how do I reduce the friction that people have of getting into the gym. And so, people every single day are going to their doctor, getting bad diagnoses, being put on medication, being put on all of these different things that they don't necessarily want to be on, or they don't want to live their life in a certain way. And their physicians or other people in their life are typically going to point them towards exercise, and strength training is a big one. Like, hey, you should probably get into the gym. And, especially with women, right? And I know your crowd is really women driven, and that's amazing. And one of the things with aging with women is going to be sarcopenia, right? And sarcopenia being one of them, osteoporosis being another. And that's one of those things where strength training is the best thing you could do for your health and overall just life in general and longevity as a whole. And so, and being more capable as you age. And I think the most beneficial is, not only adding life to your years, but like not only adding years to your life, but life to your years. Right. And I think that's a powerful thing. And strength training is one of those things that can really help facilitate that. And so, be it that the book is such an affordable resource for people, and it was written in a way to be a reference guide, right? It's not written like you have to read it beginning to the end. It is a book where you can just pick it up, open up to a page, start reading, and pick it up from there. You don't have to read it beginning to end. And it was written as that, and really designed to be a more of a reference handbook or textbook more so than a novel or, something like that.
So obviously the book goes through muscles in the body, anatomy, some of the biomechanics, some of the other things that go into strength training. What were the challenges in writing it in this sort of a fashion? Because I think in today's age, I feel like it's, I can imagine there are some challenges putting it on paper versus being like, hey, I'm going to video this module, and I'm going to be able to look at a moving 3D picture versus some putting it into 2D form. So what were some of those challenges? Because it still does a good job. And I'll ask you, we'll talk a little bit about how maybe since the book has been written, have your thoughts evolved or whatever. But at the time, what were you like, yeah, I know that I'd love to describe this in a 3D way, but here's my challenge.
Yeah. And thankfully, I worked with an amazing publisher. So DK Publishing, which is owned by Penguin Random House. So it's, they have a lot of resources at their disposal. They have some of the best illustrators in the world. They have, great editors. And so knowing that going in, like, I didn't write the book and then try to find a publisher. It was the other way around. Like, a publisher actually reached out. They had a book in mind and they reached out and were like, hey, we want you to write this book. And so that was an interesting turn of events in my own life. As I was going through different career transitions at the time, I found myself, just working with clients day to day, and I was writing some blog articles, things like that, kind of getting myself back into writing and stuff. But, I had an idea of writing a book sometime in my life, as many of us do as professionals. We're like, yeah, I want to write a book. That seems cool. I always had the aspirations, I think, sometime in my life, but I didn't really have an idea of like, in my 20s, I'm going to write a book. It's going to be published, blah, blah, blah. I just didn't have that really within me, or within my mind. And so I just was writing. I was, publishing articles that really no one was reading. And thankfully I was writing them because, as if there are personal trainers listening to this, or really anyone listening to this, opportunity happens through serendipity, right? It happens through just engaging with life. And as you engage with life, as you engage with the thing that you're trying to do, and you remain curious and you continue to put yourself out there, positive things can happen from that, right? Especially now in the internet age. And so I was just doing that actively, and I didn't really know what it was going to turn into. I never expected to turn into this, but one day I got an email that said book proposal, Science of Strength Training. And I thought it was fake. So I almost deleted it. And then I showed it to my wife and she's like, don't delete that. That seems legit. So we looked up the guy who sent the email. He was legit. So she's like, you should respond. And so I did. And then I did an interview, and then they're like, hey, we want you to write this book. And I was like, are you sure? There's other people I'd recommend. And they're like, no, we want you. And so that's kind of that was like the event, the kind of the timeline of events that happened over a few months. And then we kind of got into the making of it. And I'm like anyone else. I was a student of strength training, and it's been something that's been in my life again since I was about 12 years old. And it's something that's always been a positive in my life, and it brought a lot to my life. And, I didn't really understand, especially at the time, it's 12-year-old. I just want to look better. I want to perform better in sports and whatever else. And strength training was a physical pursuit that I happened to gravitate towards and actually be fairly good at or have success in. And then it turned into other parts of my career, which was the competing part. And then, I was studying it in school. I was trying to always improve my knowledge on it. But during that time, it's not like it was always this thing that I just always understood at the highest level. And, since I was 12, I understood how to do everything, and I understood how everything worked, and everything made sense, and I knew every detail, I knew every mechanism. That's just not true. And so as I was going, I just remained curious about what were the things, and how was I improving, and how does this work, and what is a better way to maybe perform this to get better results. And so I just remained curious about those things. And then I started putting out content into the world. I started putting content out into the world, and, through Instagram and YouTube, I've been on YouTube since 2015, putting out basically, like, you can go back and there's how-to tutorials from 2015 on YouTube still. Right. So, which are horrible for me to watch, but they're very cringy. But it was me putting stuff out into the world, trying to help other people. And that's really been the through line in my career. And, as long as I'm doing that, I think positive things can happen, not only for myself and my career, but for other people. And maybe they could find something beneficial in that. And so that was really the cornerstone of how I wanted to write the book. Like, I'm not someone that always understood it. Right. And I think that's how a lot of books are written, is they're either written from the standpoint of the reader is stupid, explain it to me like I'm 5, as we quote Michael Scott in The Office, or it's, hey, I'm writing this book for other academics because I want to sound smart to my friends. And so I wanted to kind of split the difference. Like, one, I think the reader is inherently smarter than we give them credit for. They can figure it out. It's up to you to give them the better tools to be able to figure it out. And then I'm not writing this to impress my friends. I'm writing it in a way where I don't embarrass myself in front of my friends, but I'm not writing it for my friends or to impress them, right? Or for my colleagues, or maybe people I look up to. And so I was really writing it from a standpoint, or from a perspective of, look, the reader is smart, but the vocabulary we use is important. How I introduce these ideas is important. How I write about them in a way that they can understand it, but also be empowered by the knowledge of, like, oh, I do get this. This does make more sense. And when I read it and then I go do it, it was better. Right. And so that was kind of the perspective and framework in which I wrote it in. And to circle back and finish that thought in that kind of that loop there, as I have been a student of strength training since I was 12, it's like, I haven't always understood everything. Right. And so what was the book that I wish I would have had when I started? Well, I just want to do my best to write that and put up something together that is organized, that's affordable, that more people can get their hands on. And it is ultimately just a helpful resource. And so that was kind of the perspective I wrote it from.
I feel like there's an innate fear not fear, whatever, but like, if I were to write a book in my head, this is how this would go. The minute it'd be published, I'd want to be like, all right, I messed this up, or I need to reiterate this, or, a million edits. Okay. You can go through a bajillion edits back and forth with your editor, and you can make a million iterations, but the minute that thing's out in the world, are there things, how many years ago has this book been out? And do you have those things in mind as to, like, yeah, I'd be interested in doing an update? Because, yeah, as much as things don't change, they do change, they don't change, the big pillars don't change, but, some of the little nuances, which the book isn't just like, hey, lift, eat, sleep, go. It's obviously goes into a lot of the science, and some of that in a nuanced way, you maybe iterates over time. Do you get that feeling ever? I'm not saying the book's outdated. That's not what I meant to say. I just mean, like, I can only imagine that feeling lives within anybody who puts anything out into the world like that.
Anytime you put something out into the world, you immediately are like, that could be better. That could be better. I should have wrote like that. So for sure. I mean, there's a couple sections that come to mind, like the lever systems. To be honest, as transparent as I can be, the publisher just really wanted that to be a part of the book. I didn't want to put that in the book, but the publisher wanted it in there. And so I was like, okay, I accept this, because the publisher really, they came to me and they were like, hey, we want this book written, but it's up to you how you write it. Like, set it up. We'll work together on the outline. We're going to pitch ideas. You can shoot them down and pitch your own. Right. And so it took us a month or two to actually just write the outline and agree upon what is in this book, what's going to go here. And, I understood like, this is how many pages the book needs to be. This is kind of the general layout. These are the general links of things. And so they came to me with a structure, but they really allowed me a lot of autonomy to put what I wanted in the book. But they did have a couple of things that were like, no, we want this there because based off our market research, this is helpful information. And so I was like, okay, fine. You've given me, you gave me 90%, I'll give you 10. And so that was one, the lever system. I would have rather put like resistance profiles or, stuff like that into it. So that's probably an update. If they give me another opportunity, I would probably exchange that information because I find that to be more helpful. Because no one walks into the gyms like, I can't wait to train my third class levers, like no one, nor should you. Who cares?
Yeah.
But it's still like, it isn't to say that's useless information. It's just it's low on, it's very low in terms of hierarchy importance of knowledge. And then maybe the energy systems. I think there's been more updates to the research that was kind of first surfacing when a book got published that I would go back and probably update. That isn't to say that what's in the book was the most supported up-to-date knowledge of what we had at the time back in 2020, 2021. But since then, there has been more updates to energy systems. But, ultimately,
it's not, yeah, it's not crazy. Like you said, the earth is flat or something. Let's be real.
No. It's more or less like, there's a chart that's like these energy systems are active here and more active here. And it's like, now we understand that they're all active all the time and basically to the nth degree at all times. Right. And they're recycling energy. They're all doing the same thing pretty much all the time. Just there's a bias towards one or the other. But, again, like it's not earth shattering. It's not like I said, the earth is flat and it's like, oh, there's a shadow here. The earth isn't flat. Oh, no. So it's not huge, but there are some updates if I had to nitpick in terms of the book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know it can be vulnerable to me. My first question is like, hey, dude, what would you change about the book? But I appreciate that. And I just think that was a thought that came to mind because it's like, even just with like Instagram posts on the smallest micro minutia level, it's like you hit post, you're like, I probably would have said that differently. And so I can only imagine that happens with an entire book, even though it's obviously way more goes into it from an editing perspective. There's just like... And the minute I publish this, like, we're never, it's not like we're done researching this stuff. So like we're doing a good job in this space if your book gets outdated. You know what I mean? Like that's like, it's just like, if you expected everything to be 100% true forever, then, but yeah, I think it still does an amazing job. I still reference it out now. It's not like I'm like, yeah, that energy systems thing, take it with a grain of salt. It's like most people, are going to get a lot of nuts and bolts out and a ton of good knowledge from it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. But yeah, as you said, there's always updates, right? And it's an ongoing thing, and that's beautiful. And I think that's more of a positive than a negative.
Definitely. Cool. Let's talk about what you're doing now, helping people get into the gym, kind of lowering that barrier of entry, reducing the friction, stuff. Some of the stuff you were talking about. How does someone go from? I know that's kind of what the point of the book was, but that book isn't exactly that, right? It's not like, it not necessarily like, and you just like from a gen pop, it's one standard deviation above that. Someone who really wants to learn about this stuff, for sure. It's certainly not a physics, 300 page physics textbook, right? Physiology textbook. It's certainly way more accessible than that. But has that, it sounds like to me, I'm talking to a guy who picks up lifting when he's 12, starts competing, goes pro, writes a book on anatomy, physiology of strength training, and then is telling me that now his passion is, I want to, lower that barrier of entry for people to lift and get all of those health benefits. Is that a progression that's happened naturally? Talk me through how person A becomes person B.
Yeah, person A was more myopic. They were someone who was a little bit more of a purist, as I think we all start out as, right? I think that's just stuff that evolves as you become more experienced in your field. Is you start out, you learn something, you take it as gospel, it becomes the thing you push forward because you've had success with it. And then the more you work with people in the real world, the more you experience the world for yourself, the more you mature as you age and experience life, you realize that, okay, some of that purist nature of what I was bringing to this probably isn't as matter of fact as I once thought. Maybe it doesn't have quite as much benefit as maybe more generally just approaching it in this way versus like, oh, you have to do it this way if you approach it. And so, yeah, it was like I think it was a fairly natural evolution of, I was a young kid going through school, 19, 20 up to, mid 20s, really just kind of going forward. All I knew was what I was learning in school and then putting into practice in my own experience of the thing of strength training and having success at a high level and working with clients and having success with certain approaches. But again, as you get older, you tend to soften a bit in a good way. And so I softened my convictions in certain things, or more broadly, I think. And now I care a lot less about how you do it. I just care that you do it, and so and I always try to put off, now it's my main focus is less about creating controversy and more about creating a positive nugget for someone to take and implement, and how specifically you implement it is up to you, or maybe up to the context of what that nugget of wisdom I was trying to give.
I don't know if you heard, man, but you're doing the social media thing all wrong. You're just like you're giving up controversy. Like, are you crazy? Like, no, I love that. Frankly, I really do. Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was a fairly natural evolution to my career, and I the more I experienced and worked with just normal everyday people, both in person and online, I've learned, and also as my life has evolved and my fitness life has evolved, as I alluded to in the beginning, there's always a transition, right? Like, I know you've gotten more into running and more aerobic work, and, I've picked up trail running, and my wife and I just started swimming, and, she's set a goal for us to do a triathlon next year. And, strength training is always gonna be a part of my life, but it used to be all I did, but now I just want it to be a complement to what I do, because again, there's like with anything, there's a minimum threshold of what gives us the positive benefits in this inverted U, right? There is a middle of that graph. And I think that for everyone that shifts across their life. But my main goal is, how do I help myself and other people meet their minimum thresholds, enjoy it, feel confident within doing it, but also learn how to integrate it into a more holistic approach, right? So if you do enjoy running, then run. And here's how you do it. And here's how you complement strength training with it. If you enjoy swimming, same thing. So trying to be less myopic, trying to be less of a purist, and just be more inclusive to all parties involved. And again, rather than being divisive, just being a positive influence for people to, hey, if you find yourself in the gym, I'm hopefully a guy that can help you be more confident and get better results. But if you're not for the gym, that's fine too. But I think you should be, because it's really great for you,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's hard to disentangle you arriving at that, let's say, I want to use the word that you use, like just softening your convictions. It's hard to disentangle that from coming from having been a person who had, held to his convictions more, let's say finding a place of balance after being unbalanced. It's hard to disentangle arriving at that point. And I feel that way very strongly in my own life, where like I'm in a similar way where I run now. I run, I lift. Yeah. I'm not concerned I'm not concerned with getting bigger. I don't really have any aspirational goals in terms of like performance. There's a thread of, of the word maturity somewhere in there. There's a thread of like life responsibilities changing. My wife's pregnant. We're going to have a baby. Is that like, we're reshuffling of priorities. It's all happening at the same time. There's so many confounding variables, but I also think there is an element of, I encourage people now as well, because this is my state of mind. Like, hey, let's my group program is like the theory, or the reason behind having my group program is I want people to get the most time efficient gains they can. We are very time efficient. We are more on the minimalist side of things. I want you to make gains, but we're really looking at this through a lens of a regular person who's got, max like 4 hours a week to train. And that's quite a bit, frankly. But I'm starting to like thread in some cardio, like more specific cardio. And I'm coming to this place where I'm like really excited about being balanced and, looking at overall health, longevity and enjoyment and sustainability and all that stuff. But I also can't disentangle that maybe I am there because I had a moment of going just all in on one thing, on something. And I'm not saying you can't arrive at that point without also just going all in on one thing, but I don't want people who, at the same time, I'm not saying you were saying this at all. I'm just saying I'm caught in between, like, hey, if I have someone who's like super pumped up about lifting and like, I want to let them like go in on that and just really enjoy it. And if you want to talk about the 3 divisions of the rear delt, like, yeah, we can talk about it. I'll help you keep it in context, but I don't want to like yuck your yum or pop your balloon or whatever. Like if you're really excited about that, because I know that this all happens in waves and you might take this to the complete extreme and find something great from that and then go into another phase of your life and find a new level of balance. And there's a question in there somewhere. If you feel like that you look back upon that time as like, hey, that's probably a necessary part of my personal journey to arrive where I'm at now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more of my philosophy is I'm in a position where I'm more focused on helping you take you from where you are now, where's your starting point? Where are you coming in to our conversation at? And then where do you want to go with it? Right. So for a lot of people, that's, hey, I haven't been in the gym in 20 years. I'm looking to just be healthier, get off my blood pressure medication, my cholesterol medication. How do I show up better for myself and my family? How do I stay consistent to this thing that I know is beneficial, but tends to be hard for me to consistently show up to? All the way to, yeah, bro, I want bigger delt caps and I want bigger arms and I want to be jacked and everywhere in between. And I think no one's wrong, right? Within that, right? I think there's a certain, I have my own beliefs of like how big is big enough and how strong is strong enough and how much time is enough time towards this thing before it becomes detrimental or counterproductive or, I have beliefs around there is big enough, right? So you don't need PEDs to be bigger, to be healthier. Being bigger doesn't mean healthier, right? It just means you're bigger. You have more muscle, right? And that's just the fact of the matter. And so I think there is a balance to be had, right, between everything. And I think to create a balance, we have to have had spent time within either of the extremes, right? And so I've been obsessive. I've been the 6-7 day a week, twice a day trainee. And I've been the nihilistic person who really kind of gave up training for a long stint, right? And I realized that, I do depend on this for parts of my identity. I depend on this for how I want to show up and not only show up in the world for myself, but show up in the world and how I look and feel and express myself. And then how I've chosen to dedicate a professional career towards it. And really my entire adult life up to this point has been dedicated to it. So being able to create a balance, I think first resides in being able to pull from the extremes that you once lived in. And so I think we all go through extremes of obsessive behavior and extremes of nihilism and giving it up and saying, oh, what a waste of time that is. Just do X, Y, and Z and you'll survive. You're fine. None of this matters. Who cares? Right. Because it's like, ultimately you can live that way, but what's the point in that either? Because we're here for a short time. Let's give it meaning. Let's make the most of it. Let's give life to those years and let's be the best versions of ourselves for ourselves, not only for ourselves, but for those that love us and for those that we love. And, however you choose to create balance within that, I just hope that I can help you from whatever your point A is to your point B. And that's really kind of where I've, I guess, disentangled, to use your word, that relationship with it. And again, that comes through experience of life more so than anything, I think.
Yeah, I find that nihilism is a wonderful word. I've had many a nihilistic chat on this podcast with Brian Borstein, a friend of mine. Follow Brian. Brian's awesome. Super smart dude. And many a nihilistic chats have gone on this podcast and his podcast. So I know where you're coming from, but just specifically from a training perspective of like, hey, like we're circling all the way back around to like, nothing matters if you train, eat, sleep, you get things most of the way right. And I find that too, because there was a time where I know that That's funny. The first thing I think of when I think of you is not your book. It is that gym in Colorado. What gym is that?
The gym at Prospect.
The gym at Prospect. You know why? Because the first time I went to N1 practicals, I just was like such a freaking idiot. Like I didn't look at like any of the emails they sent. I just like Googled it like on the way while my Uber was like on the way, and I went there and I walked in. I was like, I know this place. I'm like, this isn't it, but like I know. Why do I know this place? And whatever. I guess maybe that was like where some of the cast was located prior to him having his own place, or I actually don't know what the relevance of that place is, but I was like, I know people from Instagram who work out here.
That's just for context there. So I was in the initial starting stages, that first year of N1. I worked for N1 that first year and a half of its existence. So I was a coach and an educator for them, for context as well. And before they had their own facility, that's where we worked out of. We worked out of that gym at Prospect. And so a lot of the content came from there. A lot of videos you'd see me in or filming are from there. And that's my buddy Dan's gym, Dan Greenbaum. He's a wonderful human being and really took us in and gave not only, N1 as a whole, and I've since moved on from that, but myself really kind of a safe space to just go and train and be myself and film content and really just kind of exist in the way that I want to. And so, big shout out to him, but that's kind of where that gym comes into play. Yeah.
You just mean using a bunch of really sick prime equipment is what you mean.
Yeah. And obviously it's one of the best facilities in terms of like environment and pieces of equipment. I mean, it's every piece of equipment in there is hand selected of like, we need 2 row machines. This is one of the best. This is the second best that I know of. And we have them both, and that's a phenomenal place to train and be able to train clients in person and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's awesome. That's awesome. I remember you also from some of the early N1 like forum videos and stuff that definitely was the case. I just think about a person who knows so much about that. I think of myself as well. I've been to 2 practicals. I've done all the courses. I've taken other people's courses. I had a couple of years in my life where I thought this was like all that mattered, right? Completely like iliac glute max, completely like, oh, look, we have a 7th division of the pec, like just totally all in. And I'm not being nihilistic about it. Like I just went to a practical last week. And so it's just not like a thing I don't value. I certainly do. But it is interesting having just both of us sitting here being like, there are a few, we're in the 1% of knowledge on a topic and we're both sitting here like, yeah, but you should probably just focus on getting in the gym first,
Yeah, because that's, again, I mean, we got to look at the statistics, right? There's 80% of the population that doesn't meet the minimum requirements for physical activity, right? 80%. So let's start there. 70% of the US is overweight or obese. Let's start there, right? So what's the lowest hanging fruit? Let's start there. And the fact of the matter is, like, yes, all those things are very cool to know. I'm so grateful that those guys exist and they're pursuing that and they're curious about it and they continue to innovate and push the industry forward because it continues to give us places to go and it continues to fulfill our curiosities as human beings and as professionals. But again, I think our jobs are more in the realm of translation of that information and the digestibility of that information into real world practical advice for real world everyday folks who are not thinking about this 24/7, right? And who really just need to show up at least twice a week, at least the 60 minutes of what's been found to lower all-cause mortality by 33%, right? 60 minutes a week can change your life and help prevent up to 40 chronic diseases, right? Cancers, you name it. And so cardiovascular disease, the leading killers of human beings on this earth right now, strength training, at least 60 minutes can help lower that risk up to 30 to 40%. And so let's start there. And then we can get a little bit more nuanced, right? Then we can go into the different divisions and how do I grow my upper chest and stuff like that. But right now I'm more focused on how do I get you more excited and how do I get you more confident while you're here? And that's really my main priority at this point in my career.
Yep. And I find that for the right person in the right context, like I at least want to be the coach who can reach into the back pocket and help somebody who will be excited by some of this nerdy biomechanics shit. And I just the occasional client who's like, hey, that's where I'm at right now. Where it's that, like, people look like not down on that, like, of like, oh, like you're so aesthetic driven, and it's like so myopic, so zoomed in, and I'm certainly not about that with my own training. But as long as you're doing it in a good headspace, and the things that you're like, the point is to stay in the game. The point is to stay in the game. The point is to keep doing this for as long as possible. And if you can lose yourself in a good way in the pursuit of learning more and intellectual stimulation, and you find it to be a net positive, I love that. So I certainly have people who are like all the way on the like, we just lift, just execute. Like, I'm fucking proud of you. Like, let's get our nutrition in check and walk and move and lift, and amazing. 99% of the boxes checked. And then other people are like, hey, like what happens if I bend my knee a little bit less, push my hips a little bit more back? And it's like, oh, great. Like, if this is the kind of stuff that keeps you intellectually stimulated, keeps you in the game, then great, let's do it. And so people have asked, I think that I've been very vocal at all, but like people who know me closely are like, yeah, I've backed off some of my content a little bit on like some of the anatomy and physiology and some of the more nuanced stuff. And they're like, well, what are you doing going to another practical then? I'm like, well, first of all, I'm still super interested in it in general. I find it intellectually stimulating. I know that some things have, changed or updated, and I want to learn. But I also know that I want to be able to help people have fun if it's something that they find also intellectually stimulating, for sure.
Yeah. And I think as professionals, right, we all have the best analogy I've been able to kind of like put it in is we all have these like zip files in our mind, right, where that house these incredible, vast amounts of knowledge on very specific things, but they're in zip files, right? They're organized, they're categorized, they're in a place where we can at any time go in, open that file up, go to the exact place we need. Has there been an update here? Yes or no? If yes, is it massive? No. Okay, so I'm not really going to change the way I talk about it, but it could change one of the tips I give to help you achieve it, right? And again, like, I don't see that as a negative, right? That's a massive net positive. But I think where it becomes a negative is if that information is something you're wielding as a sword within, or you're wielding it as a weapon to demonize something or to become a gatekeeper of something that inevitably leads someone to less healthy behaviors, right? And so that's where I see a net negative in the grand scheme of it. But as long as you continue to pursue it in a way where it is just intellectually stimulating and it makes you a better professional and it helps you with your clients, or it just helps you stay in the game, right? Because as professionals, like you have, like anyone listening to this has in their career, sometimes things get stale, sometimes you're just kind of going through the motions. You're still helping, you're still doing your job, you're still showing up for the people who need you, but it's a bit stale. And so in every career, we all need something to look forward to, and we all need knowledge to kind of keep us in the game. And for many of us, that kind of helps us stay in the game. And how do we incorporate that? And I think for a lot of it too, it's like, I think we're both at a stage, like how much of that education we have, it's like, okay, you got 99%, maybe more of what you need here. Like I've basically learned everything I need to know up to this point and into the future that can truly just really benefit everyone that I come in contact with. And I can just use it to teach as many human beings as I can reach how to improve it, right? I know as much as I need to know up to this point, but that doesn't mean I don't want to know a little bit more, right? But that does mean to kind of use what you discussed, and I agree. And this is kind of what you see, I think, evolve in our own careers, is that gives us the opportunity now to move on to other aspects of health and wellness and well-being, right? And okay, there's psychological components to this. There's cardiometabolic components, right? It's not just about the muscular development or the strength we can gain, right? It's about where's our cardiometabolic health at? Where's our blood level? When we take our blood, like where are those levels at? Where are we at holistically? Where are we at psychologically? Where are we at from a point of just having any sort of generative drive towards life or pursuing something that's healthy, right? So I think once you pursue something so hard, I think it can become a negative if you never come out of it. Right. And unless you're just like, okay, I'm cornering myself here. This is my thing, which is what the people who are educating us are doing. Right. And that's wonderful. But in my own eyes, it's like, well, they fulfilled that. So I don't need to compete with them because I think they are the best at it who are doing it. So why do I need to try to knock them off? I'm just going to sit here and speak to my passions and speak to the people that tend to gravitate towards the way I talk about these things. And if they want to learn more, like I'll recommend you, like, go, if you want to learn more about this stuff, like go to the source, man. Like I'll help you kind of like get there. I'll help you go from point A to point B. But if they're point C, I'm good with being point B. Like I'll be the chauffeur on your way to the event. But sometimes, you know, as you experience, right? Like sometimes going to those events, sometimes it's like drinking from a fire hose. So, you know, can I be a garden hose in someone's life, you know, totally, on their way to the fire hose, yep. You know, so I think that's kind of where you and I reside within the space. And I think it's within the precious ecosystem of really any profession, but especially health professionals. You know, we need people on the ground level. We need foot soldiers who are helping people, you know, learn about portion control and macros and stuff. And we need people who are taking it one step further. And we need people who are at the upper ends, the upper echelons of that knowledge base, right? We need everyone there. We need the army of people helping the billions of people on this earth who unfortunately aren't meeting the requirements that are necessary to help sustain, maintain, and progress forward our own existence here, you know, and help that. So I think we're all necessary. And that's really kind of also why I'm not here to knock anyone down. I truly just, I move away from belittlement. I don't think it's a necessary evil of any part of this industry. And I don't think it's positive. And I think we all are needed and we're all necessary in this world. And as long as you're not coming into this with malicious intent, then keep doing you, just keep learning and keep showing up for people who need you because you are benefiting someone. Probably.
Yeah. If you're doing a decent job. Cool, man. Tell people.
Yeah, if you're doing good enough.
If you're doing good enough, tell people not just where they can find you, but what you're actually doing these days. If somebody wants to work with you, like what's the way they can connect with you?
Yeah. So scienceofstrengthtraining.com. That's the best place to find me. That's my new website. There's a newer version that's going to continuously be updated. Right now, it's kind of a placeholder website, but I'm hard at work. I've been hard at work for the past few months on rebuilding all of that and turning that into really my idea for that is to turn it into basically the expansion pack from the book, right? So the book is very set in stone. The book is the book. The book's 224 pages, and that's the book. That's what's in the book, and that's what you'll learn, right? So when I talk about bones in the book, I probably had 1,000 words or 500 words to talk about bones. And I gave you the best, most effective knowledge I could give you on bones. But through the website, I'm hoping to expand on those topics and go a little bit deeper and, you know, touch on things that are maybe common questions or, you know, how to improve this thing or whatever it is, right? And so that's kind of the idea of the website in that resource. So I'm hoping to turn that into kind of a content hub for folks as, again, another reference point for their journey within strength training, if they so choose to want to learn more about it. And then, you know, I do one-on-one coaching. I'm coming out with more of a group program as well here in the near future that I'm hoping launches around the new year. And so, but that website's mainly the hub for everything. So regardless of when you listen to this, maybe check that out and go from there.
Cool. Awesome. It was really great chatting with you, man. It was nice to meet you. I'm ton of value in here. And so I appreciate your time.
Really appreciate your time, man. Thanks for having me.